Good afternoon. We'll call to order the workshop session today. First item will be a discussion regarding the draft agenda for May 19th, 2022 council work session.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a follow-up item that we were seeking council input on. At a previous meeting, we decided to have a workshop slash planning slash roundtable meeting on May 19th. We wanted to confirm with you the items that were important for you to be talking about, as well as make any adjustments to the agenda. What the summary statement indicates is that we would talk about additional discussion of Fund 40 projects. Those would be pavilion, skate park, hostess house, the gaps in funding, fund balance, similar to a format that we did at our last workshop type meeting. The other item that I think council or staff heard council say was important to them was a more in-depth discussion about the vision and possible future use of the historic Colored School and New Hope Baptist Church as a means to outline next steps forwards. Also wanted to, you may have something pop up during the meeting, and don't be afraid to say, hey, after we go through the budget and where we are with that, it's important to talk about workforce development, or it's important to talk about any other items. So there may be please feel free to speak up, I guess, as we go through the agenda tonight regarding any items that you would also like placed on the May 19th council work session. With that, I'd be happy to get any input from you that you might offer.
Does anyone have any additional items to put on the agenda? Anything you want to expand on?
When we talk about Hannah Springs, that's mainly the improvements. That's the lowering of the rock and all that other stuff with it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Can we try to, some of this stuff we need to finalize the best we can?
Yes, we do.
At least come to some consensus of what we're going to do. We about beat Fund 40 to death, in my opinion, but
This should be
I'd like to try to finalize some of those.
this should be a good opportunity for that. Everyone speak their thoughts on this. That'll be a great opportunity
Sure,
to get some.
and just council has provided us direction on those items and potentially having to deal with the funding gaps and that sort of thing. But if you want to change the direction that you've previously provided us, we absolutely need to hear that and want to hear that.
Well, I think we ought to spend some time on the skate park as well, some additional,
Absolutely.
since we've had all these other costs come up.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get an update on the progress in the business park?
Yes, and that's also included in my staff report this evening.
Okay, cool.
Anybody else? Or got anything you want to?
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Finally, I think everybody's good with that. Next item is discussion regarding FY 2022 second quarter financial updates.
Mayor and Council, you have some handouts that are at your seat on the dais. One is the PowerPoint slides that I'll run through here in just a second. The second packet of information are the actual financial statements by major account for the various departments and funds. We have only included the operating funds, those funds that we actually work through and budget for each year. I'm pleased to report that as compared to last year, of course, last year our second quarter also included Winter Storm Uri, and we're glad to have that behind us. We'll certainly notice some things within these statements that reflect on what happened last year and how we've recovered. We hope that this is a relatively boring report with the exception of just a few items of explanation. We will take a look primarily at the overall position year-to-date, October 1 through March 31, and of course that represents your halfway point in your fiscal year. So when we talk about, you can't always do this, but as a general rule, you've wanted to have collected almost half of your money, and you've wanted to spend no more than half of your money. We do have some seasonal fluctuations. For example, some of our utilities are a little heavier in the third and fourth quarter in terms of revenue production, and we also have some debt payments that come in quarter four that sometimes will weight a little heavily. But generally speaking, not too much difference between month-to-month income and expenses. We'll take a look at just a few selected departmental performances. We'll take a look at kind of the big departments: general fund, utilities, water, wastewater, as well as electric. We'll have a reference to some airport income production, as well as streets in terms of the timing of certain things there. And then certainly we would welcome any direction or input that you might have. The first thing we're going to look at is the city by major account. So if you look in your regular packet, we're going to reference the first page in that, and that will also be embedded in the slide. So if you don't want to look at that and look at the slides, you can just look at the slides and it'll all be there. I think the overall position can be described as positive, consistent with plan. Like I said, we only have a few little explanations or footnotes to provide you regarding the performance. Revenue production is about 44% of the annual plan. However, we do know that we have peak electric and peak water usage and related revenue during quarter 3 and quarter 4. Revenue is also about $340,000 better than previous year. Expense overall is 41.25% of our annual plan. And it's also $2.2 million less than what we spent last year, and that's a direct reflection on Winter Storm Uri. We also had some timing in capital expenses. Last year we spent a lot of money in communications for police and public safety. That weighted that particular expense early in the year last year compared to what we've spent this year, as well as some timing on paving. We were finishing up Avenue E, and that resulted in a heavier expense that time of year for paving than we do in our current fiscal year. Our net surplus through the second quarter is about $900,000. The city's net position year to date has also improved about $2.5 million since previous year. So if you just take a look at rough numbers, that shows you 44% of your income is in, you spend about 41% of your budgeted expense. We'll talk about a couple of those individual lines where we have big numbers here in the next slide or two, but generally your net $900,000 positive compared to a 1.6 deficit at the same time last year, or about a $2.5 million difference or improvement in net over previous year. So just a couple of notes on revenue, and again, when we talk about particularly sales tax and property tax, overall they represent a relatively small portion of your overall budget, about 11–12%. However, they are good indicators of what's going on in our community. So overall tax revenue, which is a combination of all of those, is at 68% of our annual plan and about $173 better than previous year. Sales tax in particular, almost 60% has been collected of our annual plan, and that is about $140,000 better than this time last year. Property tax is relatively flat. We collected about $11,000 more in property tax this year than we did previous year, and I think based on new development, we can certainly could consider that flat. And as if council recalls, we did lower our tax rate, but we also know that our valuations are going up, so it appears that balanced out to a certain extent. Other revenue, which is the big number in other revenue, are utility fees. It's about 45% of our plan. However, it's $150,000 better than previous year. And in particular, solid waste is up a little bit, about $55,000 better than previous year. Electric is about $77,000 better than last year. And the airport is actually up about $68,000 better than previous year, and that's due to a reimbursement from TxDOT on a project that we completed a year or so ago. The project came in less than what we paid our share for, our match, our 10% match, so they refunded a portion of that, which resulted in the 117% of plan being collected. On the expense side, again, salary was relatively flat. Supplies expense, and supplies, the big number in supplies is your cost of water, your cost of electricity. That's considered a supply or something that could be consumable. Your expense is about 51% of the plan, and but about $1.4 million better than previous year, due in part to the electric department cost of electricity in our previous year. Capital expense, we've only spent about 17% of our annual plan, which is one of the reasons it's about $1 million better than previous year. And some of that is also related to the police department radio communication equipment expense of $460,000 and the street department paving of about $789,000 in the previous year, where we've only expended about $200,000 thus far this year. We do have some money encumbered, obviously, to finish paying 3rd Street that will probably hit in April. We shouldn't have anything in May, should we? So the remainder of that expense will hit after the March 31st date. So just a couple of things to point out. Your tax revenue, again, just year to date, compared to previous year, $170,000 better. Other revenue, $150,000 better. And then a couple of big items on the expense side. Supplies, which deals primarily, that number is that big because of we were paying extreme ERCOT market costs last year, and we aren't this year, obviously. As well as the capital expense. One of those was timing, one of those is an expense that we do not have this year.
Finally, on the salaries, so we've spent $15,000 more?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's relatively flat. You know, council did approve a 3% increase, and generally, and I haven't done the quick math on, or I haven't done the math on this since budget time, but generally a percent is worth about $60,000 to the bottom line. That would be a burdened expense. So if you look at that $15,000, we're actually well ahead of where our plan was, but we also have some vacancies still. So I think a lot of that budget is based on full staffing, right? But we almost never have full staffing. We always have vacancies in certain areas. But it is something worthy of maybe diving into a little bit more as well. Street department, like I said, that just shows you the $789,000 that was expensed the previous year versus our $204,000 this year, and that's why we're so ahead of the game there. And I guarantee you, I think you're going to hear from the assistant city manager here shortly, and I think he has a plan for spending every nickel he can of that, so it'll get caught up here before the end of the year. And also the PD, that just reflects what we discussed previously in terms of the communications expense there. So just fund performance, and we talk about fund performance by income and expense. The next sheet that you have will just go through the operating funds, general fund, water, wastewater, electric, aviation, animal shelter, and golf course. Those are separate funds that go into the budget. So the general fund is consistent. It's 43% of income and 42% of expense. Net position is about is $148,000 to the good, and we are better than previous years, we discussed, based on sales tax production and the amount and timing of capital expense. Water wastewater fund is near plan, 45% of income and 46% of expense through the second quarter. The net position compared to previous years is probably one of the biggest swings. They were in a surplus position last year. This year, they're in a $54,000 deficit again. We know going into the third and fourth quarter, they typically will create additional revenue through water sales. But we also had some expenses worthy of explanation that are different this year than we had last year. One was the tank maintenance expense for the Georgetown tank coating, as well as the increased amount of water contracts through Brazos River Authority. When we renewed those contracts, we maintained the same level of reservation as we have in years past, and on that renewal, the price did go up, and we'll talk a little bit about that in future slides in terms of the impact. Electric fund is consistent with plan, about 44% of revenue on about 37% of costs through the second quarter. Net position in the electric department is currently about $842,000. And this is actually page 2 in your list of financials. And again, this is just a very simple income and expense per fund. We just talked about the 3 funds. Again, we talked a little bit about why income for the airport is good. About 83% of the plan through 6 months. We would certainly be happy to give you more information about the other ones, but we wanted to give you just kind of the big picture, as well as those departments with the biggest numbers. Talk a little bit about water, wastewater. Other revenue is performing well going into higher use months. Water sales are at $1.3 million, or about 46% of the annual plan. Wastewater fees are about 51%, 52% of the annual plan. And of course, wastewater fees will be spread flatly. You'll receive that income kind of month in, month out, depending on if there's connections or new taps, that sort of thing. But that is typically a consistent monthly bill that we will receive income for. Supplies, we've are $800,000, or about 72% of the annual plan. We are seeing impacts of gas and diesel costs in all of our departments. The other major impact to supplies is account 5236, water rights, which is currently $318,000 expended. That's about $122,000 more than annual plan to increased water availability contracts on the Brazos River Authority renewal of those contracts. The good news and the takeaway, and I think Council expressed this very clearly, is that having reserved water in capacities necessary to deal with future growth was important enough for us to continue that level of reservation. Maintenance, this is the Georgetown tank. It's only about 44% spent of annual plan. It's about $209,000 worse than previous year, and again, that's almost due entirely to the Georgetown tank maintenance and the agreement we have with the Kempner to help maintain those tanks. I want to talk just very briefly about a couple of the other funds, water, wastewater, and just point out, your other is going to be your fees for service, 48%, overall income, 45%. Again, you see your supplies are slightly overexpensed there if you look at that 50% mark. And then your maintenance is also in line or on track to make budget, but about $209,000 more than previous year. Electric fund notes, and again, I think this is fairly boring. On other revenue, you've received about 44% of your annual plan through the second quarter, $77,000 better than previous year. That's due in part to electric sales. They're at 48%, and that's going into peak usage months. We actually use about 40% of our electric load over 4 months. So 33% of the year, and you gain 40% of your revenue during the same period, so as you can imagine. Supplies, and this is, the big one is basically cost of electricity, but supplies, 48% expended. But we do have about a $1.6 million improvement due to the financial impacts of Winter Storm Uri to the ERCOT market rates. So that is a big reason there. Net position of the electric fund is $840,000, and that's about a $1.7 million improvement from previous year. This is on page 28, and this just points out just a couple of things that I've noted. Your percentage of income as well as expense. The big number there under supplies of $1.6 million, which is almost entirely related to the cost of electricity last year versus this year. Just a couple of other quick notes, and certainly we've given you, like I said, I've just tried to give you a very brief update with some perspective on the numbers. I have not focused on the smaller departments, but the big ones, electric, that's the biggest number in your budget every year. We did take a look at that, and it's fairly boring, other than it does indicate that you know, our plan is on track and that we did recover well from Winter Storm Uri and also to COVID-19. City will continue to be impacted by higher prices for materials, labor, fuel, equipment, and I think the other thing that we're seeing is how long it takes to get stuff. It takes a long time to get parts for equipment. It takes a long time to get transformers. And I think we'll continue to be impacted by those items. I do want to applaud council because despite some of those setbacks, we have maintained a very aggressive public works and capital campaign or capital project campaign. We did not have to put any projects aside based on our position last year. We were fortunate that we were financially healthy. You know, I think one time Council Member Pierce asked, you know, what about insurance? The best insurance, we can go out and find insurance, but the best insurance is to make sure that you have a strong financial foundation. You have good reserves. You have people like Flint Gigley and those people on the front line that pay attention to what they're doing and what they're spending. So we handled that well. Just a couple other things that you may want to start thinking about. I think our workforce will continue to be impacted by inflation, retirements, perhaps competing jurisdictions from time to time. At this point, we would just recommend an ongoing monitoring, and if conditions remain stable, I would like council to consider some sort of discussion or maybe a formalized plan related to workforce retention and recruitment. That would include compensation. And then I think the only other thing that this, and I've said this to council before previously, but only if it does not impact our ability to provide efficient service, staff would also like to seek your input about compensation to current employees in lieu of new staffing. We want to make sure we can provide good service in the same level we've always been provided, but at the same time, you know, if we only need to hire 2 or 3 people instead of 5, maybe we can use that excess funds for the new folks and spread that among the current employees. But
Finley, is it possible to do a survey, a study on that?
yeah, and I think we've done one in the past, and I think Ryan has got one that he's been kicking around a little bit. So, but we absolutely can.
Okay.
Finley, when do you expect that we'll start working on the budget?
I would like to actually use a portion of the meeting on the 19th to just lay out some, you know, major priorities from council, or hear your major priorities.
Does anyone have any other comments or questions? Thank you, Finley.
You're welcome.
Next item, discussion regarding the Calvert Municipal Building Improvement Project scope.
I think this is the last time I'll be up at the podium this evening. We do want to take the opportunity to, and again, this is something that was discussed, I believe, on March 28th that we outlined putting down for tonight, at least as a discussion. And I think starting from the end, what we're looking for is a green light from council to go ahead and develop a scope for the basement. We want to also maybe provide you the opportunity this evening, if you'd like to take the elevator ride down to the basement and take a look around. I think the scope that we are, at least the starting point of the scope that staff is thinking about is, let's do something with lighting, let's do something with wall finishes. We don't necessarily have to have the complete end game vision, but let's at least get started. The other thing that we would want to look at in the scope is the exterior, lighting, landscaping, et cetera. We actually had Lucian over this past week to look at our pecan tree. We've lost 2 trees on this block to lightning. And I'm afraid to say, and you can look out the window and take a look at the pecan tree, but that middle trunk is dead. It was struck by lightning as well. And that it's probably not in danger in the next couple of weeks, but that tree is probably on its way out, and we may want to remove it sooner rather than later, just in the event we were to experience some high winds. But so things like that we'd like to include in the scope as well. But
Is there any interest in going down to the basement?
Yeah, I went down there today.
Did you want to do that now or do it after?
we could do it now, we could do it at the break, whatever council's pleasure is.
We'll wait till the break. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. I think there's some interest going down.
We'll prepare a scope and have for your review.
Yes, I really want to make sure that we do get some lighting outside as well as landscaping. I want that.
The foundations have been poured, the conduit has been installed. It's just a matter of getting them wired and set up. So thanks to the electric department, they've been working on that.
Will our electric department be doing that? Is that what you said?
They have done it to this point. We may have to hire an electrician to actually wire it in, but we certainly have plenty of room in the load center in the basement to accommodate that. And of course, they're not going to use, I don't even know if they'll use an amp on those LEDs. But
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I would say yes, please, go ahead and plan a scope. And is everyone in agreement with that?
Talking about a landscape plan in regards to outside,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
regarding trees, grass, sidewalks?
I think we need to do something with trees. We've now lost, well, one on the corner of 3rd and Main. We lost that tree. I think, unfortunately, we'll probably end up losing this pecan tree over here. And we may want to also do something on the north side of the building as well. And I'm not advocating at this point a landscape architect, but we'd at least like to work with someone that has an idea about how to plan and how to utilize the space we have.
Right.
Is there a way to irrigate it?
Yes.
I would hope we have at least some knowledge here within the city that could help us out in that area.
Yes.
Any other comments? Thank you, Finley.
Thank you.
Next up is, do we have the police department out there? Can you tell? Okay, thanks. Okay, Ryan, the discussion and presentation of fiscal year 2022 street improvement projects.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'd like to take a little bit of your time tonight and work kind of through what we're proposing for road improvements this summer and actually late spring so that we can kind of get started on our pavement preservation. So just to give you a little bit of overview, The city of Lampasas maintains approximately 60 miles of pavement, and our goal has been to be strategic this year, as every year, but make sure that we're transparent in how we collected the data, what we're showing. Thank you. Sorry about that. But what we wanted to do this year and the approach that we took was our street staff put in a lot of effort, went and drove roads, looked at pavement surfaces, basically classified those, and I'll get into that here in just a second, but it's called the PASER rating system, which is a visual system. It's 1 to 10 is the rating, 1 being the worst roads that we have, 10 being the best. And then the data that we collected, we sent to our GIS folks, and they've uploaded it so that we can see visually, what roads really need attention and what roads are still in good enough shape that maybe we don't have to do any maintenance. And just to give you a little bit of background, I know not everybody's familiar with pavement processes and kind of how the PASER manual is structured, so I wanted to throw this slide in there. But it kind of gives you an idea. If you can see the picture, I know it's probably small, but you can see a rating of 10, a brand new road like 3rd Street. And then it kind of works its way down with a 7 still being pretty good, a 6 still being, acceptable. And then you start kind of moving down to where, it's time to do some major maintenance, maybe more than a seal coat when you start getting into 4 to about 2. And then rating 1 is, of course, the worst street, and it's got to be rebuilt. So that typically means the base underneath the road has failed. There's significant water damage. There's a lot of potholing. Maybe the edges have come unraveled in the road. But just to give you a little bit of background, there's a lot of communities and a lot of DOTs that use this type of scoring. A lot of them are starting to trend now to hiring consultants to go out and do a pavement assessment with actual LiDAR technology and scan the road. But really for 60 miles, and we've done some QC on this, I feel like it's fairly accurate, and it's something we can improve every year.
I had a question, I guess I think it may be Heatherly, possibly. I was driving down that, and there's a whole lot of new construction, and so there's a whole lot of cutouts on the road.
Right.
How long, is that, I guess that's normal, and then they cut it out and they leave it like that, and then they'll fix it later and patch it? Is that what they do?
So what typically happens, and that's a good question, what typically happens on these new developments that come in, they have to make a sewer tap or a water line tap or whatever it may be, and in that area, we've got it identified this year. They made several cuts in the pavement to make those connections to the houses, and it's something you can't always plan for when new development comes in some of these older areas of town. However, it is at the top of our priority list for our own utilities as we're going in and repairing and replacing sewer mains or water mains, for us to coordinate that. So our wastewater manager and our streets manager, as well as our electric manager, have sat down and kind of talked through this and made sure what we're proposing is feasible, and we don't have to come back after the fact 6 months later and hopefully tear the road up with a project that we know is coming. So we're trying to, we still want to make sure that we're being kind of as forthcoming as we can with the roads that we feel like need it, but without having to come back and replace cuts and, spend more money on the road. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, because it kind of looked like some of those pictures, but, I'm assuming that if it's a whole bunch of cuts, then that road's going to be a high priority to fix it after the fact.
Right, it will be. And we've got it on the list this year because you're right, that when you backfill as many cuts as there are through there and you start trying to get compaction on the material to where it won't sink, you see when certain contractors come through, they'll cut up the road and then they'll come back and patch it, but there's always kind of a little bit of a swell in it. So we're hoping to prevent that on this road. But the overall PASER rating, I was really excited about that. So As you can see, I'll start with the good, about 26 miles, and this is mileage that I've got shown here. So good and excellent is, of course, the green is excellent, good's blue, and almost 2/3 of our roads fall into those categories. So that's really, speaks volumes to what's been done in the past and how roads have been maintained. And as Manager DeGroffenreid mentioned, he said that, a lot of our capital funds has been put into roads over the years to make sure that we're upkeeping those. And it shows here. The fair, we've got about 14.5 miles of fair condition roads. Poor is 3.8 miles, and just a little bit over a mile failed, which would have to be rebuilt. And so we tried to focus on the poor roads that were still salvageable this year, as well as some roads that need some seal coats to just address some cracking and maintenance, but not structural help. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that.
So of our 60 miles, only 1.196 needs to be rebuilt? That's pretty
Well,
fantastic.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's the ones we've identified that definitely need to be rebuilt. Some of the ones that maybe a 2 or a 3 might still fall into that category that are in the fair, or actually the poor category, so that 3.8 miles. But several of those we're going to address, hopefully about 2.5 miles this summer of those, roads that are in poor condition, so it'll bring those scores back up. So hopefully we won't have to rebuild them, but yes, ma'am, that's correct.
In your evaluation of the road, are you taking into consideration the actual drainage that's there or lack of it?
Typically, we do on the rebuild. The Paiser rating is strictly for what the pavement surface looks like, although we know we've got some drainage issues out there causing some of those problems.
We have a lot of roads that I call humpback that are almost like a watermelon.
Right.
And that's because there's no drainage there.
Right.
And we've put those concrete transitions in that can tear up a bumper on some cars. And I didn't know when y'all grade those, if you take that stuff into consideration.
We do to an extent, but the majority of the rating stems from what the actual pavement surface is. There's some defined things, cracking and different types of cracking, and how many cracks are in a certain square yard of the road, and so some of those things play a factor, but drainage definitely does.
Yeah.
I think our goal is on rebuilds, to totally redesign those roads, kind of like we did Third. We changed the grade and brought that parabolic curve or the big hump in the road down to make it a smoother transition, especially going across those intersections, because we do have several of those that we would like to address, with a contractor. So.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just had one more quick question about that, because the drainage is what reminded me, like, do they can take into consideration like the roads like on Second, or it's not Second, excuse me, Chestnut that goes across, because like on things like that, I mean, it's kind of like we ran into that problem like what was in front of the church, where it's been paved on and paved on and paved on, and there's that funky, real, like it's a deep, I mean, because it's so tall compared to the curves. I mean, the curbs, excuse me.
Right. I think our goal in those instances as we do redo and rebuild roads is to basically, what they say, mill or just cut that piece of the road out and tie back in when we have roads that have been overlaid numerous times. Because there was probably, I think I counted four overlays, typically 1.5 to 2 inches stacked on top of each other. And so it does cause that. But the goal is when we run across that, at some point you have to stop the construction on the main road, but you do want to tie back in as smooth as possible, on those roads that are old like that.
One of the things we used to do, and they haven't done it in a long time, is a skin patch. A long patch of type FF asphalt or those types of things. That skin patch would help smooth out a lot of those areas where they've got the cuts across, You can catch several of those at once
Right.
in a skin patch, and they've quit doing that for some reason.
Right. I hope we may bring that back because I was actually looking into doing that skin patch or blade patch, and then possibly putting a layer of seal coat on top of it to seal that loose material, and then you have a nice drivable surface. I think most of that we could probably do in-house like we do our seal coat. I think that would be pretty beneficial and cost-effective, if we take that approach on some of these roads for sure. It's a good
Was the
idea.
were the park roads and the cemetery included in this study?
The cemetery is, I'm not positive, don't believe any of the park roads are included. I think it's only the cemetery that was included.
Maybe at some later date when we get an opportunity, we might take a look at it.
Because we do maintain a lot of the park roads or,
Yeah, I know.
parking areas, so it is something we need to account for. So just an overview, this is what it looks like, and I know it's probably small, maybe a little difficult to see. But again, there's the colors that were identified: good, excellent, poor, failed. You have key, the TxDOT road's actually red, so going through town, key, and then where it splits off, and then the FM road's yellow, 580 going out. But all the other colors internal to the city limits have been collected, and this is where we, pulled the data that we're using for this year's pavement maintenance plan. So just to go a little bit into kind of what we're planning on doing and maybe what it looks like. Our first application for some of these roads will be a mill and overlay. As you can see the picture there on the left. It's where the surface, there's a machine that has teeth on it, and it grinds up a layer of that asphalt to kind of smooth it back out, so when you put new asphalt on top of it, and you can see the new asphalt on top of what's been milled right there. Sometimes you'll hear a mill and inlay, which is when you have curb and gutter, mill the road up, set down a new asphalt surface. And then our seal coat application, which is what we typically do in-house, is just a liquefied emulsion. And then there's a rock spreader that comes right back on that and covers it with rock, so that gives it a skid surface. The seal coat applications typically, when you have a really good structural road that doesn't have a lot of potholing and a lot of alligator cracking and some of the things you see out there, is typically a candidate. And so you're looking at a range of about 5 to 7. If it scores in kind of that range, it could be a seal coat candidate. Mill and overlay is usually from 5 to, most of the time not 2, but maybe to 2. So it's kind of on that lower end to basically bring that surface back up. I don't know if anybody has any questions on any of these applications. So this one I always think is interesting to look at this graph. You can see quickly how the curve drops off after 14 years, the black line on the bottom. However, the white line, if you do some seal coat, crack repair, some of the minimal maintenance things, it extends the life of that pavement. Typically in the past, I've always tried to focus in on seal coat for all roads that are still in good condition, at least once every 7 to 8 years, if not sooner. This graph shows every 4 years typically is seal coat, and we have several roads that kind of fall into that category. Some of the ones we've picked this year fall in that 8 to 9 year range, so it's fairly consistent with this. But as you can see in the red, it says replacement down there in the bottom right. Basically, when the pavement gets to that and deteriorated to that level, then it's time to replace it, and those are typically a 1, score a 1.
So it looks like back on that, every 4 years, the seal coat, it's going to add an additional, 6 years?
Yeah, it adds typically, because it's still going to deteriorate at a lot slower rate with seal coat, but typically about, if you can seal coat it realistically about 7 years, you keep extending the life of that another 7, and then another, at some point, depending on You know, typically after you do about 3 seal coats, you want to come back and either mill it up and then put down a new surface. Usually 3 or 4 is about the max you'd want to do on seal coat. But it does help. Typically new pavement, so like on 3rd, what we would typically do is in about 7 years, look at the cracking, see what kind of shape it's in, and then come back with a seal coat on top of that. And then you've bought another 7 or 8 years before you really have to do, you know, too much maintenance to it.
And you probably have another graph in here somewhere showing the cost versus just letting her go.
Well, I can tell you what the cost is if you let it go. Right now, with the way costs are and what's been bid lately, including the business park, 3rd Street, the asphalt prices keep going up like everything else. And so we're about $2 million if you had to rebuild the road right now, a mile. So you're talking typically in a rebuild, that's curb and gutter, a new paved surface, the base material that goes underneath, and reconstructing the roadway. So it adds up pretty quick. If you don't do the maintenance and you wait, in some instances, and have to rebuild the road, it gets pretty costly.
Did you say 2 million a
Yeah,
mile?
2 million a mile is
2 million a mile.
typically what it would cost. On most of the streets that we have are 40-foot wide. I did an average 35-foot wide because we do have some that are more narrow, and came up with just a cost estimate on that. Typically, to do a mill and overlay a mile, right now with the way things are, it's about, you know, 200,000, give or take, for an overlay. And then, of course, seal coat, doing that in-house and just purchasing the materials ourselves. You know, we can do a mile of seal coat between, you know, $30,000 and $50,000, depending on the width of the road. Wow. And so it's a huge cost savings if we can really identify the ones that would benefit from that now. You know, over the next couple of years, our goal is long-term plan. Now that we have a lot of the data to plan that out, you know, where we're going to go for the next probably 8 years. If you can do an 8-year look ahead, that way you can kind of plan out your seal coats and what things are probably going to be, what roads will fail. So
Be sure on the roads that you pick this year that you notify the gas company and the phone company in advance, and you can strive to them our concerns when they come behind us and cut into a newly paved road.
okay, we'll make sure we do that just so that we're covered. As you say, we'd hate to put in new pavement and have one of the utilities come back in and cut it right after we're there. So we'll make sure we send them the list. And another thing, when we get to the list, is there any more questions on this slide? So one thing I wanted to stress, we've put together the roads and the segments of the roads. So the length you can see there is what's in our GIS system. So it's, you know, like Walnut, 347 feet long, and then Park underneath it, that's 2 segments of Park. There's a small piece right as you turn off of 190 that's 82 foot. And then the next segment's a little bit further down, which is 312 feet. But I wanted to make sure that we capture, there's other segments along there that we may do, we may not. Some of the other segments scored a little bit better, but if it's close as far as scoring, if you're a point or two, you know, away from each other and we're going to already be in that area, we may try to address those. So I just wanted to stress, this is what we've tentatively come up with. We've still got to vet it with both Flint's team and Van's team, just to make sure we're not going to have any utilities planned to come in there, and we'll work with the gas company too, as well as the phone company. But just wanted to kind of clarify that. So these are the roads that we're potentially going to repair. And as you see, most of them under the PASER 2022, that was something I wanted to point out. Those were the scores that we have for these roads, and most of them are 3. So the 3s typically fall in a mill and overlay or an overlay scenario, and that's what you see here. It's pretty consistent. There's the previous PASER ratings from 2016. There was I believe the Public Works Director went out and gathered all that data. So we at least had something comparative. to kind of see, it helps kind of quality control check what we did. And you can see in most instances, the ratings coming down a couple points. And, where it was possibly needing a seal coat, now it's a mill and overlay because of the time frame. So, but one of the things too, I was going to point out, if you look at the totals, I have basically identified about $309,000 of our capital outlay budget that's identified for roads and street improvements, as well as I think Councilwoman Keeney had mentioned Brown and Heatherly in that area, so it's also identified there at the bottom as additional paved area. So the total's right around $400,000. And the current budget left after third, hopefully once the encumbrances have gone through, is about $450,000, maybe a little bit more will be left, and then the remainder is about $65,000, and those monies will be moved for seal coat to purchase the materials. We already have all the rock. We just need to purchase the asphalt emulsion when we get ready to do those.
Is it ready available?
I'm sorry?
Is the rock asphalt readily available?
It is.
Right now, I guess I should say.
Yeah, it is. We went to our suppliers, typically Wright Asphalt there in Brownwood. We went to their plant, talked to them the other day, and they're in full production, and they're ready, to our knowledge, because we asked that question. And he said, no, this year we're prepared, we're ready. There shouldn't be any, so hopefully.
Would this make sense, and I'm thinking out 2023, 24, 25? I know this probably isn't a part of the comprehensive plan as it is right now. Would it make sense to include that as we continuously build our infrastructure?
I think it makes really good money sense to.
For budgetary items, look, just that 5, 10, 15, 20-year outlook, because you've got that graft,
Right.
Out to 18, 20 years.
Right, yeah, you can potentially at this point kind of, make a pretty good guesstimate on where things will be, if we start looking out and which roads really need to be addressed, so. And the last slide I had was the roads that we're looking at for seal coat. As you can see, the total on this one is about $45,000, which, depending on the previous graph or the previous slide that I showed you, those will all be bid out to a contractor. That's why we were trying to get a good group of roads to get a better cost and better price, to push that out as one project this summer. And so the remainder will be used then for the seal coat roads. Hopefully, and that's one of the things that we wanted to talk to council tonight, to get some direction and hopefully, move it ahead. I don't know if anybody has any more questions. I'll be glad to answer.
I think in the past, don't you ordinarily let all the residents of these streets know that this is coming in advance?
We will.
Yeah.
We will. Yeah, that's something we typically do. Door hangers. We'll also knock on folks' doors if we need to, but typically door hangers, we'll put it out in the news, because typically, regardless if you're doing seal coat or an overlay, there can't be any cars on the street. So it's really important that we get the word out when we identify those roads, that, and kind of a tighter time frame on, when they'll be out there working, on what days, so that they know not to park on the front street. Any other questions?
Anyone else have any concerns? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and interrupt for a moment, because we have our very finest in the back, I believe. We want to read a proclamation designating May 15th through the 21st as National Police Week. Whereas the Congress and President of the United States have designated May 15 as Peace Officer Memorial Day and the week in which it falls as Police Week, and whereas the members of the Lampasas Police Department play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Lampasas, whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of their police department, and that members of our police department recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence or disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression or intimidation. Whereas the Lampasas Police Department has grown to be a modern and scientific law enforcement agency, which unceasingly provides a vital public service. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Mayor T.J. Monroe, call upon all citizens to observe the week of May 15th through the 21st, 2022, as National Police Week by commemorating and thanking our police officers, past and present, who by their faithful and loyal devotion to their responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens. I further wish to extend the appreciation to Interim Chief Jody Cummings and the Lampasas Police Department for the vital services they perform and their exemplary dedication to our community. Thank you so much for all your service. Okay. Next item, discussion regarding walking trails, combination and options.
Good afternoon again. To give you a little bit of background on the trails, there's been a lot of discussion, especially with our CIP committee, talking about the trails and identifying different paths that we feel like get folks from one location of town to another, and a lot of the spots that individuals enjoy going to, so Brook Park and Campbell Park, downtown. And so the Parks Director and myself drove all the trails basically from Brook Park and connected with as many paths as we could, so as much sidewalk as that we could access, and then made our way through downtown up to Campbell Park, also collected all the trails that are inside the wildlife area across the street from Campbell Park, just to kind of give an overview of what the connectivity could look like. If this is truly a path that we want to move forward and do some signing for and do a project where we make sure that it's ADA accessible, because those are the real key things when we're looking at some of these trails. Everything has to meet the ADA standards, which is grades and transitions. In a majority of Western, which coming from Brook Park, most of the trails there, which are paved or concrete sidewalk, probably fall into the ADA category where they've already been addressed. But as you work your way towards downtown, there are some spots that probably will need ramps, so there'd be some ramps involved. Some of the things that we were kind of discussing, especially Western, as you make the connection to downtown or back to Brook Park, it's wide enough that there could be some potential for adding bike lanes and striping those and posting some signs for bikes to make, both the sidewalks as well as the roadway accessible and adds mobility to the community for folks going to some of those areas. I did reach out because we have 4th Street, which is a TxDOT facility right here that we would need to cross. I did reach out to TxDOT. We'll probably have a few more discussions, but some of the things that I talked with their TP&D director was about pedestrian crossings in this downtown area because traffic is pretty significant, to try to get across 4th Street. And so there's already one crosswalk there. He was aware of that one downtown by the courthouse. It's already got pavement markings down, but there's no signage. So what I'd asked him if we could reconvene at some point and discuss, those instances where we cross, if we need some flashing beacons for pedestrians or some of those things that you could push a button.
Could I also say that the markings are faded? It's very hard to see them. And as an oncoming traffic, you're not going to see that on the road. If someone steps out in front of you, you might see that. But I think if those markings were more pronounced, it'd be easier for the driver to see as well.
Mm-hmm.
And out in the middle of those crosswalks, and they got run over.
Oh, they did? Yeah, I know which signs you're talking about. State law, the pedestrian
Yeah.
sign that mounts to the ground. Those sometimes will slow people down until, like you mentioned, they run over them and they disappear, after too many hits. But Mayor, I believe, that's one of the key things that when you have a pedestrian crossing, if it's not an all-way, 4-way stop where it's controlled, it's something that we've really got to kind of focus on. How do we bring attention to it? Those panels, those vertical panels that can be mounted in the road are a good way, but people do run over those sometimes. But some of the things that we need, there's a pedestrian sign with the arrows down. If you push the buttons, little LEDs come on and they'll
Right.
stay on, to basically enough time that anybody with accessibility, concerns can make it across that intersection and it brings attention.
And is that something TxDOT would have to do, or can we do that ourselves?
TxDOT would have to approve that because it would be in their right of way, so.
So I think we should ask for that. There's a lot of people stuck on one side or the other, scared to cross 4th Street.
And I've heard some of that concern as well, trying to get across the road.
With having to get TxDOT's approval, does that also mean that they'd probably be paying the lion's share of that? Or we pay for it and they just have to approve it?
So there's a couple programs for crossings. I don't know if they still exist with TxDOT to help offset some of those costs. A lot of it would come down to are the devices and the signs we pick something that TxDOT will approve? Because they make flash and beacon signs now that you push that are on a smaller stand, a lot less expensive than what TxDOT's typical standards are with a big pole and a base and things that do take up some of the right-of-way. So I think those are things we can talk through with them for sure and find out, what kind of cost share could we do. Typically, if it's in their right-of-way, I think if we had a good plan on how we were going to approach the trails and kind of a finalized version to sit down with them, or even a draft, and say, hey, we've identified these intersections. There may be some potential for them to install them. I don't know that for sure.
Sorry. Okay, so like y'all said, there were those signs, because I just thought they took them out. I didn't realize they were run over, those pedestrian signs. So were those our pedestrian signs, or were those TxDOT's pedestrian signs on those crosswalks, I guess, close to Live Oak and 4th, and, because there were two of them, weren't there?
There should be two, one on either side typically is what you do on the crosswalk. I don't know if there was, but.
In the middle, yeah. they were in the
Right
middle.
on the center line is what they typically do.
So
Right.
my question
It
is,
would
were
be
they
TxDOT.
ours? It's TxDOT, so they just never replaced them?
Doesn't,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
they made a,
years ago.
they made a big attempt and quite Texans aren't used to crosswalks. So they tend to walk everywhere.
Right.
And the signs got run over and they eventually just abandoned the whole deal.
Yeah, because I could imagine if you're making a left turn off of Live Oak from downtown, to head towards Copper's Cove, depending on where that placement was out in the road, if you had a trailer or a truck, you're going to track right over that sign. And, you've also got to figure out a good location for those too. Any kind of areas where you're backing or you have turning movements, those tend to not last, or that's not really a good application for those either. So that may be why they took them out.
Well, I was out of the area recently, and those flashing lights that you mentioned are really effective. And there's even chirping that goes along with it to let you know how much longer you've got to get across the road. So
Right.
I think we can put something like that right there, maybe further down on towards Western might be effective as well.
Right.
But for sure, right there at 4th and Live Oak.
Yeah, I believe for the visually impaired, that's really good to have that guide, to sit there and beep and help them get across the road safely. But my only fear, typically you see those more with the sound. It's required at an intersection that's signalized, so it knows when to send that signal and give them, because if you're visually impaired, you don't know if traffic's coming or not, so you're relying on that signal. I haven't seen it used, and I don't think just a pedestrian crossing, just because if it, gives them the sound and they assume, hey, it's clear, and they're still, you're hoping vehicles stop there, but that's not always the case. So, but I think all those things are great ideas and things that we'll definitely vet those and look into that.
When I'm looking at your red lines on the map, I can tell where everything's going, except for the one, what's happening there on East 3rd, kind of like across from Cooper Springs? It's kind of like, because the red line kind of dead ends or it's doing some stuff around East 3rd. What is that?
So that's a great question. Let me give you a little bit of background on what we did on the map. When we started at Brook Park and started working our way down along the river there, when we ran out of sidewalk or open area that we could actually drive on, we stopped it and we left that point down there to the south as hopefully a connectivity route to get to the other side, so you can see where it picks back up, which is actually, since this map's turned a little bit, I guess that would be east. So where it picks back up and then comes back up to 4th, there's actually a Corps of Engineers dam there that you can walk on top of. And so one of our options would be to talk to the different landowners or property owners there to see if they would be willing to grant us an easement or some sort of right-of-way to where we could make that connection. So that was one option that's a possibility. As you get to, let's see, thank you. So as you come up from there, basically we came up Western, and then we went down, when we got to 4th Street, we went down 4th Street, going east. And then, crossing that, we didn't show a crossing point because we wanted to, as we were talking about, talk to TxDOT on what makes the most sense and what they would be willing to consider for crossing, since they already have one crosswalk there at Live Oak. And then, so I think we can identify at least one, maybe two places in that stretch from Western to Hackberry. And then as you go north to the park, as you were saying, what we have there is, I'm trying to go off of memory, but I don't think there's any sidewalk at all, or there might be a little stretch before you get to Ajimoto on the east side. So that would, we identified that as a walk path to get you over to Campbell Park. And that's how we made that connection going north and then cross. There's already a pedestrian crossing there to get you on both sides there at Campbell. So there's already a pedestrian crossing there, so we used that. We did the internal trails. and also internal trails there, you can see by the pool. And then we came back, kind of a route that we're proposing, to come back, get you back to downtown or back to Western. I think there's a lot of different options. This was just the first, kind of trial run to see where things were that were in existence, and some of them aren't there now, but to kind of see what connectivity might look like.
What are you looking to from us?
Our goal would be to get some direction on if we wanted to go ahead and start working through maybe some sort of finalized draft. We're going to need at some point, we're going to need a scope and an engineer to identify the areas where we're going to need ADA accessibility or improvements done to make sure grades and some of those things are going to work. So I think at this point it would just be direction to move this forward, and then if there's any other input, if council would like to walk some of these areas or drive some of these areas, and if there's other ideas of taking a path a different direction, staff would be open to that. We would definitely be open to that.
And we've had some volunteer groups saying they would be willing to work after you've decided what we need as far as scope.
I think that would be really helpful.
We could get some work, I think, from some of the nonprofits in
Okay.
town.
That'd be great.
I have some questions about connectivity and safety, but I think I'm just going to come by City Hall and talk about it because we got a lot on the workshop agenda still.
Great.
Cool.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Next up, we have discussion regarding zoning amendments related to building height.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is just the first step. We've had a proposal, or a proposed development, if you will, to the assisted living. And I put it on your dais. I kind of gave you an overview to kind of show you, to refresh you of where this location is, but it's right there across from Boone's RV Park. They currently have the assisted living. It's zoned retail. We have the SUP for the assisted living, but now that, depending on the need, they want to expand that area and develop into two 4-story multi-family apartments that's age-restricted, and then 1 2-story. With that being said, our zoning amendments currently today only go up to about 35 feet. So it's a little, about 2.5 stories is what we allow. Some districts we allow 3, but typically it's 2.5. So I presented this kind of just a general, like I'm doing with y'all this evening, to my planning commission, just to kind of give them an idea that we're going to have to start getting the ball rolling to kind of start looking at how we want to amend our zoning regs to allow more stories, more height, because it's coming. Everybody's going vertical because we're running out of land, so that's the next option, is to go vertical. I didn't want to just do it for this proposed development. I didn't want to just go in and amend and get that approved. I wanted to do it across the board of what we felt was good for our community. So a lot of districts, they do it based on their lot size or the density or where it's located. If we want to say, we'll only have it in this zoning area, just to make sure that it's a good fit. We want it to blend in. We don't want it to stand out. We don't want to obstruct anyone's view. We don't want it to be a nuisance. So we want to really kind of methodically think of where we want the heights to be and how it's going to complement our existing community. So I'm starting with this one. Like I said, I've given the same information to my planning commission, kind of get their feedback and, start looking at it. I wanted to give y'all the same opportunity to review it, because once I go to the planning commission, I'll come to y'all for my ordinances to amend the zoning regs. So you'll notice that on here, on the back page in your packet, I kind of gave you a rundown, kind of a snapshot of what we currently have for residential and commercial. So like I stated before, residential is typically about 35 feet. We did make an exception a few years ago for a planned development. We were allowing them to do 3 feet or 3-story. And then if we wanted to modify that anymore as a podium structure where they had the 5-story of apartments on top and the 2-story on bottom, which would be the retail district. So we have allowed that type of scenario for a planned development, but that's as far as we went with modifying any building height. So I didn't want it to be another exception or another modification to one type of zoning. I'd rather do it across the board. So my next step is just kind of researching more municipalities, seeing what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're putting it together with their lot sizes. Because like I said, a lot of it is based on their lot size, what they can accommodate is going to be determining whether they do a 3-story or 4-story, et cetera. So I just kind of wanted to put this out there for y'all to get an idea of what's coming.
So you've presented it to P&Z,
Yes.
and did they have any complications with it?
No, the only thing they were worried about is just the fire safety, and we assured them that they would still be, some building code that they would have to, amend and accomplish that before it actually goes forward with their safety routes, with their fire suppression, with,
So
things that
could
we'd
you
have to be
address that
considered.
just a little bit more for the fire suppression, how, if it's over 2 stories, it's mandatory that they have it?
To be honest with you, Ms. Mayor Monroe, I don't know the specifics on the building code as far as I know it's square footage, I know it's gonna be your height.
Chief, could you help us with that?
That was my next question. That was my next question.
I did speak with the Planning and Zoning Committee. I assured them that as far as any construction that's done, it'll have to conform to the code that we have. The code will require, depending on the size of it, the elevation of it, those types of things, what type of occupancy that it is, they'll have to have built-in fire protection, whether it be a standpipe, whether it be a sprinkler system. It details even the access for it. It details the types of interior finishes, those types of things.
And we already have that in place,
Yes,
so.
we have that in place. Recently, with the adoption, we're under the IFC 21,
21, right?
2020. So any new construction, it's going to regulate all that, and it will make sure that we have paths for ingress and egress, and depending on the size of the structure, it even requires that the heating and air system shut off and create a negative pressure in places and a positive pressure in places. So fire safety is not any type of a issue that we have with this.
Sounds like we're pretty well prepared for that, if you go forward.
Becky, we are currently handling as planned development, anything that would come in like that, under planned development?
Well, we modified our plan development so we can accommodate a 3-story, and we also modified it to where it goes from 3 acres to 2 acres so that we can do a plan development. But a plan development is starting with, fresh, raw land, and they develop this based on the standards.
Correct,
So-
I understand that, but as far as these 2 projects, until we have an opportunity to make sure that we get the rules correct on how we want it, this is not something we need to rush into and just adopt. I'm wondering if they get here before we get it done, or are we prepared to deal with it through a planned development?
We can't do this as a plan development because it's already been developed. We're talking about adding to an existing development that's already there on 281.
I'm talking
So-
about the new ones you just brought up.
That is the new one. What you have at your dais is where the assisted living is located. They want to modify that parcel and add 2 4-stories and 1 2-story to the existing property that's there, which is the 5 acres.
Becky, is that that place right behind the 18th hole? Just right behind it?
Yes.
18th hole golf
Yes,
course?
yes.
Now, did you say it was still going to be age restrictive though over there?
Correct.
Okay, even with the new construction?
Yes, the multifamily is going to be age restricted, and I believe they're looking at over 55 only.
But the height of these would be outside the scope of what we currently have adopted.
No, sir, we're going to have to modify our zoning regs to allow that development to happen.
But our current zoning regs, we don't have it
No,
to
sir.
deal with it. That's what I'm saying. But I don't think it's something that we need to just rush into and give you direction on at this point.
Well, we need to respond and we need to go forward with this. That's why I'm bringing it to you now. So once I bring you something as far as the ordinance to amend it, it'll be something we discuss and approve at that time. Because we can't hold up their development,
Certainly we can. If the rules aren't written,
Anyway, at this time, I just wanted to bring it to your attention to review. As
Right.
I know more information, I'll bring it to you to review as well. It'll still go before my planning commission. Y'all will be brought with 2 readings for my ordinance of how we want to amend going forward.
How far along on the development are they besides having this one? I mean, I know they've got the first phase of that What is their time frame?
I don't have a specific time frame right now. I'm fixing to go to my zoning board because we're going to do some amendments possibly for variance for parking. Then at that point, we still have to get civil review because we're going to have to modify some water and some electric lines, verify the footprint of where they're actually going to sit on the property to ensure they meet setbacks. So we're not ready to move forward, but I don't want to hold them up once they start moving. I want to make sure that we know going forward of how we're going to be anticipating the height of those buildings.
Any other comments? Thank you, Becky. Next item is discussion regarding wayfinding signage.
So back in November of 2021, I kind of wanted to go over some details that I provided at that time. Part of that was to increase the awareness of Lampasas, to promote the business and historical landmarks, to provide a positive experience for visitors and locals, and to increase the merchant revenues and the foot traffic. And then, of course, take advantage of our highway frontage. Our strategy was at that time was kind of to identify quick wins. We wanted to be a phased project, sign visibility and the size of the signs that we wanted to utilize, sign placement, whether we wanted generic or specific, if we're going to do restaurants, et cetera, and museums. We wanted to make sure we knew what the sign material would be, the maintenance, to make sure that they were easily to maintain. Branding and consistency, we wanted to make sure that each sign, represented Lampasas the way that we wanted to, and it kind of built back to our logo. We wanted to be able to track the successes, and then the sign master plan would be a phase, budget, and funding. Right now, at this point, in the packet, I've actually identified and given you some high-level ideas of placement, and those were basically on TxDOT frontage. This is just an idea, kind of a scope to where it kind of shows you some initial ideas of where we wanted to put the placements, and I also included the pictures of like some sign examples to show you how we wanted to, distinct of where we wanted them to go. So if we want to get them downtown, we want to get the museum, the courthouse, we want to make sure we had, the exposure that we wanted and get them to where we wanted to go. But we also have to make sure that we're able to get their attention, because when you're driving in a car, you only want to have like 3 destinations on a sign at one time. You don't want to have it too busy to where they miss the opportunity to know where they're going, and that we're not doing justice by giving them the sign that's going to get them to where we want them to go. So once we identify our vehicular type signs, then we'll go down and do pedestrian type signs to where they're a little more, they have a little more information on there, but it gets them directly to the pool, it gets them directly to Art in the Park, it gets them directly to the museum. But we just want to get them off the highways and get them to our downtown at this point. So I also included the comprehensive plan language with regarding to our gateway signs and our wayfinding signs of how they kind of intermix with one another. Our gateway is entering the city. We want to make sure we have those high priority when you're entering Lampasas. What kind of message do we want to give? What kind of signage do we want to have? But then we also want to have those directional signs once you get into town to show them where to get to those areas of town of interest for them. So it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of be a 2-phase, maybe 4 or 5 phases by the time we actually are able to implement how we want to do this going forward. Because first, like I said, my initial is to do the RFP to get the request for a proposal from those sign contractors who can help us and develop our plan for our city. We want to keep it simple, but we want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, if you will.
Can I ask you a quick question before you move on? Over there at 190 and Western, would that be a place at all, like to pull people over there by Santa
Yes.
Fe? Okay.
They actually have that identified as like a medium gateway.
Okay.
So it would be, and there's already a sign there that we need to refresh, refurbish, kind of make it more enhanceable. But yes, that is a definite idea, 190 and Western. We initially want to do the 4th and 190 to get them to downtown, but if they miss that opportunity, Western and 190 is a great opportunity, and even possibly Key in 190. We may not want to busy that intersection, but then you have the destination of the hostess house if you kept going straight. So how we want to determine what kind of signage we use is going to be a joint effort, but we need a sign contractor to kind of help us and guide us who has that experience. And at the same time, we got to get TxDOT on board to identify, can we put a sign here? Is it okay? You know, where's our placement? How far back does it have to be off the TxDOT right away? So that's why we kind of focused on these 4 areas that were identified on this map to say, hey, are these doable? Can we do this? What's our next step? Just to kind of get their feedback. Because a lot of the sign contractors that do the wayfinding, they'll reach out to TxDOT and they already have that relationship to where they know what we need to do and how we need to do it. But we wanted to kind of get your feedback on, are we doing in the right direction? Do you want us to change it? Do you want us to do something different? You know, but I think right now we're at the point where we really just need to do our FP, get some, you know, feedback from the sign contractors and decide on who we want to use going forward to help us facilitate this, with the understanding we want it to be phased. We want to, you know, do 2 or 3 signs this year, and maybe next budget year do a couple more signs, because we want to also incorporate our city signage for our facilities as well, because we want to make sure it all says the same thing and they all blend together.
Is this the same presentation you gave to the CIP committee?
The CIP committee, I actually, Greg brought us from FSP Group. He came in and did a presentation with them last summer, I believe. I gave them my presentation I gave to you as a visual of what we discussed in the fall. So they are a privy to what we've been talking about, what we've been discussing, and they want this to happen sooner rather than later.
Right. We've been talking about it for years, so sooner would be good.
I think you're on the right track, and just keeping that continuity of the logo and just trying to get everything unified. I think you're on the right track.
Thank you.
And I mean, the thing about it is, you got low dollars to do something like this, and you get a big bang
Right.
for the buck. I mean, it's good investment dollars spent.
That's the way I feel. I mean, this would be my first time doing a wayfinding project, but I just know that I want to make sure that whatever we put out there that we're happy with and we like it and is doing what we want it to do. Because if we go out and do a whole entire project of wayfinding signage and it's not exactly what fits us or what's good for our community, then we're not getting anything out of it. And that's what I want to make sure we're doing.
Is there a possibility for any kind of cost sharing with any organizations within town as well that will be highlighted with this wayfinding?
Well, I'm not saying no, but when we do the wayfinding, we want it to be kind of as generic as possible, so that it's, you know, dining, it's entertainment, we will, of course, if we can, do the museum and, you know, maybe City Hall or the library, but we want to keep it as neutral as we can and make sure that it's a good fit for everybody. We want to get them downtown for shopping and retail and food, and we want to get them out, you know, 281 to go entertain and food, and so we don't want to really hone in on any one specific restaurant or one specific, you know, to have to, because that's a lot of upkeep too.
I think maybe I phrased that wrong. And we got Merchants Association, Courtyard Square Association, like it's highlighting downtown, or you have like LAFTA that maintains like Campbell Park and putting sculptures out there. Like, would there be any talk with some of the stakeholders of possible like cost sharing with that, if they're even possible? Not like forcing them into it,
Right.
but if everyone's going to get benefited or get a benefit from it,
Yeah.
I think we should at least explore it.
I think that's a great next step too, when we get our proposals back on the sign contract and what the advantages are and the costs associated with that and how we implement it, and maybe there is something that we could benefit from other organizations.
I think that's a great idea, because Vision had anticipated doing a sign at Third and
Third and
Key,
Yes, ma'am.
and the opportunity fell away. So I think there's still that desire to participate in something like that.
Absolutely. It's a great idea. Thank you.
I also like the simplicity of the sign.
Thank you.
Do you have everything you need from us?
I think so. We'll move forward.
Anybody else have any comments?
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Next item is discussion regarding the fire department incident reporting and billing. Chief Smith?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you can see in your notes, on November 22nd of 2021, the Lampasas Fire Department requested guidance from City Council on whether to begin billing individuals for services provided by Lampasas Fire Department as it pertains to motor vehicle accidents. The billing company that we use, Fire Recovery USA, had advised us at that time that many large insurance companies were refusing to pay invoices that were sent directly to them, and they advised us that we should send those to individuals. We brought that to your attention to seek guidance from that as far as how you'd like for us to move in that direction. We got a reminder in an email recently that we need to move forward with that and either begin billing people again, or we need to go ahead and do away with our contract with this service provider, Fire Recovery USA. So again, we're bringing this up to y'all to see if you want to pursue this and what direction that we would like to move on that.
Is there any possibility to distinguish whenever services are provided and there's billing to go out, you know, whether it's an accident that's just a straight up accident or if someone is actually at fault for recklessness or negligence? Is there any way to determine that and to maybe bill more towards things that could be avoided rather than just a fender bender or something like that?
You know, I'm not sure on some of those that we could make that determination, but the majority of the times with this, if you had an accident over here at Western and 4th Street, and it was just simple that we came out there and, you know, maintain safety and help the people and everything like that, we don't send any type of bill on that. What we typically send a bill on is if we're doing something beyond just the normal response to that, if we're having to clean up the roadway, as far as if we have a large amount of fluids that are spilled or anything like that, we're putting down absorbent, we're there for an extended amount of time, we're providing some type of extrication service in that. Anything that's above kind of the routine, the normal of that, that's when we would send a bill to that. We've even had the discussion of, okay, are they residents or non-residents? Do we send bills to that? I don't know where that lies in that. I don't know if you can distinguish between a resident or a non-resident for that. That would be something we need to check out. But this is basically to recover if we're out there for an extended amount of time, if we're out there manpower intensive, using more than what just the normal broom to sweep up something.
Well, wouldn't that be the responsibility of the insurance company that's having to take care of the wreck?
Yes, and that's what we would be hoping that we would do here, is that providing this invoice to the individual, they would pass that on to their insurance company. The expectation and advice that we receive from our third-party provider is that the insurance companies are wanting that route to be through the individual, then through them, and not directly to them. So that's what we're trying to do.
Chief, can you refresh our memory about how much money you stand to lose if we don't start billing the individual?
We take in about $7,000 a year. That's always, it's variable. It depends on the wrecks. It depends on how many of those are major incidents and stuff like that. You also, you get involved with if we have some type of environmental issues on that. When we call on a third-party provider, if we have somebody that spills something, if we spilt milk, believe it of all things, the dairy trucks that come back and forth down 281 and 183, if we have them turn over down here by the creek, that's a hazardous situation, not for us, but for the creek. So we bring in a third-party person that comes in and they do that, and they always turn, and they're gonna go after the transport company or something like that. So it's not anything that's unheard of to expect that there be some type of response on the insurance company to provide that.
What's the billing look like now? Do you guys send bills out right now to the
We've not
insurance?
sent any out. Part of the reason we've not sent any out is because we haven't had those types of calls in that. So it's been kind of out of sight, out of mind right now. Like I said, the reminder from the third-party provider was the stimulus for us getting up here again and going, hey, we need to move forward with this. We can go into a phase with them where we keep our contract with them, but we pay $250. If we don't do it and come back after that year, it would be $500 to get back with them. We've already done all that work up front, so if we'll start billing again, they're obviously getting a percentage of that too.
So what we're trying to do is say, go ahead and keep paying the $250.
Well, we can pay $250 and be inactive, or we can all the way around just say, hey, we're not going to do it anymore.
So if you want to bill the individual, who then you would say, you need to send this through to your insurance.
Yes.
If
And
you do that and the insurance pays, we're ahead that way.
Yes.
If you're not going to bill them at all, we're not going to have any money anyway, so
Well,
can't
it
you
depends
just
if the
send it?
insured pays the city back. I think there's another route that you can actually take here. Is if the insurance company pays back the insured that we're billing, they still have to pay us. I mean, that check doesn't come straight to us.
It did in the past, did it not?
Well, the system that we use, Fire Recovery USA, They send the bill, and we get a check from Fire Recovery USA.
So then the
But they're-
insured pays Fire Recovery USA?
Yes.
They're just concerned that, the third party's just concerned that you're not actually billing the
Yes.
insured.
At this time right now, yes.
Okay.
Does Fire Recovery USA have counsel that goes after these insurance companies?
I do not know the answer to that.
Because if they're not, I mean, should our city attorney or should we be contracting someone to go after these insurance companies?
For 7,000?
Huh? Yeah.
We're talking a small amount of money, if I heard you right. You said $7,000?
Yes, ma'am.
Chief, I know you don't get paid for your opinion, but what's your opinion?
My opinion is that right now, I think we need to take a serious look at this. I think that in preparing for budgets for this next year, also what you've already heard this evening, the cost of providing services is going up continually. Estimates as far as fuel cost and what I'm going to turn into the city manager, it's a significant amount. So this would help offset those costs. We could definitely be more aggressive about billing people. We could be less aggressive about billing people on these. This is all provided as far as it's a setup fee already that's recognized throughout the nation as far as what it costs to have a fire engine respond to your location if you have some type of command vehicle at your location. And of course, the fees that are paid that we bill out for, these are always going to go to the customer, to their insurance company, and then it's paid. And then of course, that insurance company is probably going to raise rates. So it's a vicious battle. But if we're out here trying to make sure that we can continue to operate and provide those services, I would say that that's something we need to definitely look at and continue to do.
I agree with you.
And if it comes down to something where there's law enforcement involved, I've seen in other jurisdictions and whatnot, there is damage, that's part of the restitution that's demanded, like any kind of plea deal or any kind of, settlement of any kind of criminal case or anything. I mean, I think you're looking the same way civilly with that. I don't know. We got 3 major thoroughfares coming through. I know it's only been 7,000 so far, but can you see a potential in the future? I mean, it just takes one big spill or one big accident, and I mean, we have no control over that.
Yes.
So if Fire Recovery USA isn't providing counsel to go after any of these folks, could you check on that and see if they can do that? And
I
if
will do
not,
that.
We can maybe look at some other alternatives.
I will do that. Were there others with questions about this?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next item is discussion regarding any item on the regular agenda. Do we want to talk about anything? I think we need a break. If I could get a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
About 10 minutes. Okay, we're back in session. I will call the regular session to order. Our first, Jody, if you would be so kind as to come up and lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this great evening, this great company here tonight, this great facility, and such a great community. We would ask that you be with us on both sides, information, and that we were able to share it and make good decisions for the benefit of this community, which is the benefit of your people, all of us. We ask that you be with us tonight, world over, for all the conflicts, and please bring peace. And we especially appreciate the fact that this is National Police Week coming up next week, and the proclamation tonight for us and the Public Works. Pray that you'll be with all of us on the first lines as we take care of your people's business. We ask that you forgive us of our sins. We ask that you watch over us in safety until we can meet again. In Jesus' name, amen. Please join me in the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay. We do have one more proclamation. It's National Public Works Week, May 15th through May 21. Whereas public works services provided in our community are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, whereas the support of an understanding and informed public is vital to the efficient operation of public works systems and programs, including water, sewer, streets, public buildings, and wastewater disposal, to provide these essential services to our citizens. And whereas the health, safety, and comfort of this community greatly depends on these facilities and services, whereas the quality and effectiveness of these facilities, as well as their planning, design, and construction, is vitally dependent upon the efforts and skills of public works officials, whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff public works departments is materially influenced by the people's attitude and understanding of the importance of the work they perform. Now, therefore, I, T.J. Monroe, Mayor of the City of Lampasas, do hereby proclaim the week of May 15th through the 22nd, 2022 as Public Works Week, Building for Today, Planning for Tomorrow. In the City of Lampasas, and I call upon all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and to recognize the contribution which public works officials make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of Lampasas to be affixed this 9th day of May, 2022. We have citizen comments. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter not included on the agenda may do so at this time. The City Council may not deliberate on items presented under this agenda item, and we have no one. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter that is included on this agenda may do so at this time. I see no one. 2.1. Discussion and possible action concerning approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on April 25th, 2022.
I didn't see any corrections. Recommend approval.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda, we have 3.1, discussion and possible action regarding purchases and charges in excess of $4,000 from April 1 through April 30, 2022. Discussion and possible action regarding March 2022 investment report. Does anyone wish to move either of those?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I have a question from there.
Okay.
I was just looking at the, I guess it's page 60 here in the packet. And I just had a quick question on it. The invoice amount where it says $963,736.03. What is that?
I believe that's the vendor set.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the total, Yvonne?
I just wonder what that is. I'm just curious.
That would be the sum of the Groupon's 59, I believe.
So it's on another page, whatever makes up that number?
Oh, it's a total of all the invoices over 4,000 for, okay. Yeah, just curious on there. I saw that up there.
It's these 24 invoices that make up that dollar amount. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And it was just on that page by itself, and I was just, what is that? Okay.
So we had a motion and a second, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Finley had a couple of comments to make, I believe.
Just briefly on the investment report, Vaughn and I had talked last week about the possibility of moving some money around. You know, one of the byproducts of the inflation is a raise in some of the money that you can get on your money, so the interest rates have gone a little bit up on investments. We have, if you look at the investment report, a fairly low weighted average maturity. So there's a possibility that we may be investing in some other opportunities. And just so council understands, Yvonne and I are both certified and current in a Public Funds Investment Act training, and that any dollar that we have, and I think hopefully council remembers this or knows, but any dollar that we have has to be guaranteed in some form or fashion, either through a pledge by the bank on another account or through the FDIC. So while we look at that, we also want to reassure council that we do things as safer than what the law even allows. So
I'd say get it if you can. Was that it?
that's it on that.
Next item, we have no board or department reports. We'll go with the city manager's operational report.
Just a few brief comments. Mayor and Council Pavilion was ready, put to use, I believe, this past Saturday at the LAFTA event. And if you did have the opportunity to get out to Campbell Park, it was hard to find a parking space. There were a lot of kids running around. There were council members with painted faces, and it was a really great event. It's the kind of event you want to see. Kids were doing stuff, and our park was being used, and we're fortunate to have LAFTA in place to do that sort of event and program. We will be working on some electric connections. That's about the last bit, and then also we're going to have to run electricity over to the pavilion. We did pour a slightly expanded ramp to it and slightly thicker in the event that somebody had a trailer or something they needed to drop something off or put some sort of food vendor type of situation. So we think that'll be a pretty functional addition to the connection. We are, now that we have this big pavilion out there, we are going to start also looking about what do we do with it now, you know, how, or in terms of the renting, the reservation, that sort of thing. We're running those traps through the park board first and before referral to council. Kiwanis, we found out from Kiwanis that their application for the splash pad was not awarded, but we did get a visit from the president of Kiwanis and said, hey, you know, we still have an interest in that facility. Would you be willing to continue to talk to us? We do have some money that we perhaps could put to it. We certainly think that there's a lot of investigation that needs to be done. However, we continue the conversation and certainly will report back through the park board and to council on anything that's either worthy of note or actionable. The skate park, since our last meeting, last report to council on the 25th, we have tentatively scheduled a second stakeholders meeting for June 1. And just so council understands, the meeting was scheduled understanding that council will have the opportunity for additional input after the May 19th, on the May 19th planning workshop and the May 23rd council meeting. Timing should also provide staff any opportunity to act on direction that we receive by council. Ajinomoto Foods North America, we did have a virtual meeting with them this past week. We wanted to, one, get an update on the progress of the on-site grease interceptor installation. As council may recall, their plans are to install two 10,000-gallon interceptors. which we think will have a positive, obviously a positive impact on their loading. They are probably at 95% design phase, which means they're just waiting for the stamp on those and to get the funding in place. We also have sent them some additional information, some information we had previously sent them, as well as some new information that they've requested. They do have a new person on their team that is working with Bruce, that obviously through the meeting, we understand, man, somebody's got to get him up to speed. We've been working on this for about 18 months now, but we did decide that we needed to meet no later than the end of May, so we'll report back on a future meeting or how that becomes set up. We did have an health insurance meeting on May 5th, which basically just highlights the claims to premium ratios for employees' health coverage. We do that in anticipation of our rate setting for FY23. Through the previous 12 months, and they do a running 12-month ratio, claims were about 84% of premium, which you think, well, that's great. Well, that's not that great. We've been coming in the 65% range, and when we hit that, typically our rates will stay the same, or I think in 1 year, when it was a fairly good ratio, it went down a little bit. So we're certainly hopeful. I think the strategy at this point is let's wait a month, maybe 2 months, and see if we can drop some of those higher months off the end, because they were towards the 11th and 12th month of that review. And just as a reminder, the shared cost of health insurance is about $1.2 million. Business Park, glad to report that there's been good progress on Phase 1 construction at the Business Park. And with really only a couple of exceptions, the subgrade is to elevation. I think they will probably need some additional compaction, but at least the tie-ins to 183, the northern tie-in to 183 will have to be built up probably another 3 or 4 feet. The southern tie-in to 183, as council may recall, that plan calls for some traffic-rated box culverts to be installed there. So they'll have to have those culverts installed and then bring that subgrade up to elevation at that point. But with the exception of that, it is a nice wide swath up to grade and ready for, I believe the plan calls primarily for about 10 inches of base. So that to be brought in. They will not do that, though, probably until they install all of the underground utilities, the water and sewer, which has tentatively been scheduled to start this week. I don't know if they started scratching any pipe in the ground yet. No, I was out there today. The target was to start the underground utilities this week for that. We certainly, I think at least Carlos feels like there's at least a couple of weeks ahead of schedule. And I would encourage you, if you do have an interest, please get a hold of Ryan or Mandy, and we'd be happy to give you a drive-in tour through there. We'll put you in a city truck so you don't have to beat up your vehicle to go through there, but we'd be happy to run you out there. I have heard that they have stopped people from going in there. There have been people coming in asking about all that nice black dirt in the detention pond, but that has been posted. And by the way, the detention pond is also excavated to elevation, and based on this rain last week, it looks like it is in the right place and caught some water. Summer reading program. I always like to highlight programs at the library because I think, like the LAFTA event this past Saturday, they do such good for our community. And the registration for summer reading will begin May 16th. The program will run the month of June. We'll have teens as well as youth. The theme for this year is Read Beyond the Beaten Path, and just as with the Trail of Tales work in conjunction with park staff, they're going to be using the park facilities to do a lot of their programming as it aligns with their theme. We anticipate about 75 to 100 participants in that program. Text 21, we did attend the first virtual meeting since council approved our membership. In Text 21, a number of things of interest were discussed that impact us locally. Representative Carter just talked about his role in terms of encouraging dialogue between the Department of Defense and various state departments of transportation to gain some momentum for I-14. And we also heard from the Brazos Valley MPO, who is looking at I-14 in and around Bryan and College Station. And they think under the best of circumstances, if they had a pot of money, it's probably 15 years before they turn a shovel of dirt. So that's how long that process he anticipates taking over in that neck of the woods. And of course, it also talked about additional discussion related to kind of the inclusive nature of this organization. It's not just streets, it's also ports and freight and rail, and tying all of those things together, because that sort of transportation, as a lot of you know, is linked. The other thing that I wanted to report is that we did receive paperwork for Flint Gigley. He's retiring, and we knew that day would be coming. He's anxious to spend time with his grandkid, so we wish him well. We'll see if we can't talk him into staying a little longer than what he said, but it looks like the end of June will be probably the close of his 36th career with the city. As you know, he's built a trust level not only with this council but with this community in terms of his ability to be Johnny on the spot and the guy that makes sure your lights stay on, and if you need something built, and he's one. But anyway, I did want to pass that on to council. Thank you.
Thanks, Finley. Next item up is 7.1, discussion and selection of a website photo contest.
I nominate entry number 1.
Was that, you want photo 2? Does anyone want to go for 1 or 2? He wants to nominate 2, so, and then go to 2. All those, we have a motion, need a second for number 1. So it's going to die for lack of a second. And so we have a motion for number 2. And a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me.
1 opposed.
Thank you.
I thought that little bird was the cutest. 7.2, discussion and possible action regarding replacement of rim 4-ton unit at City Hall.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Yes, through regular maintenance, we've learned that there is a coil leak in our lobby unit currently. So we went out and got, I facilitated to try to get 3 estimates or quotes. I received 2. I'm still waiting on KSR, but as publication, I did not receive their bid at this time. So I'm asking is that we were to possibly approve a motion to not exceed $6,500, because based on the 2 estimates I did receive for the replacement of the 4-ton ream unit at City Hall for the lobby unit, that would be my max of $6,500, which came in at like $6,300 from All Seasons. This is non-budgeted item. However, there is funding in my non-departmental building and grounds and maintenance.
I talked to Tim Miller coming over here, and he said he'd give us a 10% discount. So, if he goes with it. Or I'll smack his little bald head.
So is that a motion?
I can go ahead and just move, I mean, looking at these 2 quotes here for a specific. I mean, I would move that we use Miller Service Company because they came in cheaper there and spend $5,800, $1,543.
So we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Now, do we have any questions concerning this? Yeah. Did you take the 10% off?
No, I wasn't done with my motion, but I'd like to amend that motion. But we have to vote on that one first.
Okay.
Okay, so right now we had a motion to approve Miller's in the amount of the 581543. We had a second. And then do you want to amend your original motion, or do we want to move forward? How do we want to do this?
You would consider the amendment before the main motion?
So I'd like to amend to include, I mean, do we probably need a little bit more in there just in case?
That is my hope, just because it's not specifically as far as what all he's gonna include in this bid. So there was like a $500 difference between the two, and that's why I put it at 6,500, not knowing what KSR was gonna come in at. I felt that would be comfortable to make sure that we would cover all my bases, to make sure it was replaced.
I figure since they hadn't got theirs in yet, then I would move to use Miller Service Company and an amount not to exceed, I'd amend to 6,300.
6,300?
So we have an amended motion.
And don't forget to work that 10%.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, the amended motion is for not more than 6,300 using Miller.
Millers.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
7.3, discussion and presentation of FY 2022 street improvement projects.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As discussed in the workshop, we're preparing for our paving season, and it's one that'll keep us busy for several months this summer. We've got approximately 60 miles that we do maintain now of paved roads within the city limits. We did do a Pazer evaluation as described earlier, where we're looking at the surface of the pavement and scoring it from 1 to 10 to try to identify the roads that are in need of specific preventive maintenance treatments. And the list that we've put together and identified for mill and overlay projects as well as seal coat projects is what staff recommends as a tentative list to begin the process for an RFB, so a request for bids, and to be stay within the budget amount. I think currently we have approximately $450,000 in that budget for street capital outlay that we would like to put towards improving these various roads.
I would like to recommend using the identified list for mill and overlay of the street cost estimate list to develop a project scope and advertise for request for bids.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. 7.4, discussion and possible action regarding the fire department incident reporting and billing.
Good evening again. As discussed in workshop, we're looking for guidance from City Council as far as how to pursue or to continue on with billing individuals or vacating that contract with Fire Service Recovery USA. So we're looking to see as far as, do we want to go ahead and begin billing individuals for services that are provided, motor vehicle accidents, if it's beyond what is just a routine call, and we're just looking for guidance from council on that.
I make a motion to consider a motion to begin billing the insured individuals directly.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Are there any questions, concerns?
Yes, I have a question, because one of the things that we had talked about in the workshop was that we were going to get a little more information, and you were going to find out if that company does have people that, or attorneys that go after the insurance companies. And so I would prefer to wait until we get that information.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and vote against doing anything right now and try until we have more information.
Any other comments? We have a motion at this point to begin billing, and I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
2. All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
3, 4. Bob, how did you vote?
Against.
Did you get that?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. At this point, we need a motion to adjourn into executive session. We will be going into executive session pursuant to Chapter 551 as follows, relating to the authority of public power utility governing bodies to deliberate regarding competitive matters, utilities.
Move we adjourn to executive session.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.